Okay. So hopefully everyone can see that now. And we can get started. All right. So like I said, this is the lab results webinar put on by the Canine Brains Project of Harvard University. So first of all, who am I? Let's just go with, I'm a Harvard PhD student. I am a member of the Canine Brains Project, which I just mentioned. So the Canine Brains Project is a research initiative set by the HECT Lab that is aiming to learn more about why dogs are the way they are through using multiple different methods, but especially neuroscience methods. Through this program, I have a master's degree in evolutionary biology. And in my personal life, I'm still a dog nerd, so I do nose work. I've been doing that for about a year now with my dog Tamsin, who is a lab mix. And then I also do canicross with her as well. And yeah, like I said, I'm a dog nerd, been a dog nerd my entire life. My first book was a dog breed book, so super obsessed. And I'll just add a caveat here that I am definitely not claiming to be a breed expert on Labradors by any means, but I'm hoping to maybe bring some of the scientific perspective on Labradors that you might not get in your daily lives. So, oh, and then right here, I should mention that this is Benito, a Labrador retriever who participated in one of our studies that I'll talk about, and he's doing a behavioral experiment here with me. Okay, so kind of a layout for tonight's webinar. First, we're just going to talk about some evolutionary history, which is really leaning a bit more on the history side, but we'll talk about evolution a little bit. Then we'll have brain and behavior, because that is my sweet spot. And then we will talk about genetics and health, because I think there's some really interesting stuff there. And then questions, answers at the end, and hopefully we'll get it all done in an hour or so. So first of all, to start with evolutionary history of the Labrador Retriever. So as many of you know, the Labrador Retriever is descended from dogs that were brought over from the UK to Newfoundland in around, starting in the 1400s, but up through the 1700s. And really what happened here was fishermen were really in need of dogs that were able to retrieve nets, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But because of that, they had these dogs brought over from Europe that they were familiar with, and then they started to breed them. Now, there's this common misconception, perhaps, that there were indigenous dogs that were breeding with Labrador's ancestors back in Newfoundland back in the time. But it's actually probably not the case because there's no documented instance of a European ever seeing a dog in Newfoundland prior to colonization. So there just really weren't dogs there until they were brought over. And in this picture here, this is actually a wood carving from Thomas Bewick in 1790. And this is a dog that was imported from Newfoundland back to the UK, or is a close descendant of one of those dogs. So it's unclear whether this dog was like a very true to type dog. But this dog in whatever book it's included in, I forget now, is called, this dog is called a Newfoundland. And that's because at this point, that was the term that was really used to apply to these European dogs that were working with fishermen along the coasts. And what were they doing? Well, mostly working with fishing lines and things like that. So they were like bringing them back to the boat and things like that. But then sometimes they were used for hunting even at this point. And sometimes they were used even for waterfowl hunting. So like is pictured here. And at this point, the breed is kind of known as the Newfoundland, but people will then qualify this is the St. John's breed or the St. John's type of the Newfoundland or the lesser Newfoundland. And this basically was the population that eventually led to Labrador retrievers. And you'll notice that the dog in this picture is black. And at this time, authors often wrote that most of these dogs were black. Um, and at this point, they could come in smooth or long-haired varieties, which was, obviously not the case today. And so at around this point, St. John's water dog really is a term that's being used. And these dogs, as you can see here, look fairly Labrador-like, maybe a little fluffier. Um, and essentially, the reason why the smaller and the larger varieties were kind of split was because the smaller variety was better for working in boats. And the reason for that, as the authors of the time will describe, is because the dog brings in less water when they jump into the boat when they're smaller versus when they're larger. And so the bigger version became what we now know as the Newfoundland. And so here is a phylogenetic tree. So this is just a scientific diagram that is showing relationships between different breeds, or oftentimes it's different species. And this uses genetic information to determine how to make these relationships. And so kind of basic, way to look through this is where the lines meet. These are roots, and then at the end where the breeds are, these are stems. And basically, the root tells you, okay, this was the last common ancestor, or the last thing that both of these things were related to. And it turns out that most people tend to think that the St. John's water dog is the precursor to all of these retrieving breeds, especially since the genetic evidence shows that they're so closely related. It's a little bit sketchier here with the Nova Scotia duck-calling retriever and the curly-coated retriever. It's possible there might be a little bit different ancestry, and really we're looking closer to over here. But I think that this is a pretty good representation of kind of what we're looking at when we're thinking about how the St. John's water dog turned into the Labrador retriever. And you can see here that this is the greater split down here, and this is the lesser split that turns into the Labrador retriever. And then from the Labrador retriever, we have the golden retriever and the flat-coated retriever descendants. And so a little bit more about the history. So essentially, the lab was registered as its own breed by the Kennel Club in the UK in 1903, after they had been imported back and bred by some dukes for a while to, be a really good land hunting dog. But then around 1903, people start to recognize them. And really the first field trial that was held in England was in 1899, I believe. And there wasn't a Labrador retriever in that trial. But about 4 or 5 years later, I think, was the first retriever trial. And this dog here, Munden Single, was the first retriever to participate in a retrieving trial. So that's really cool. And then over here we have some pictures of some King George V's dogs. So he actually showed and bred dogs, so we can see what they looked like. And then over here, Evelyn Marshall Field is really cool. Basically, she won the first retriever trial held in the US. That was in, I think, 1931 with Carl of Boghurst. And so I think that's very cool that especially a woman was the first one to do that. Yeah, this is basically the more recent history, and then we have the present day. According to science, there are different varieties of the Labrador. I know people have different opinions on whether you should acknowledge a breed split, or if you should try to breed to only one thing or whatnot. I don't really mind about that. What I'm just trying to get at here is that there are genetically distinct types. bred according to different selection criteria. So because we have different things that we're selecting for, we're producing genetic changes in these dogs that are distinct from one another. So we have the field or working line Labrador, which has become more and more specialized for field trials, as well as hunting and just regular hobbyist, times. And then we have the common type here, which is kind of anything that was bred for companionship or confirmation. So most labs are going to be this type. And then there are also assistance types. So sometimes there are service dogs or guide dogs that are the common type, but most often they're bred by one of these larger organizations that have their own distinct breeding pool and their own distinct breeding aims. And they kind of do things in a different way than everyone else. So we have those types. And if you're interested, at the end, we can talk a little bit more about different varieties of labs. We can talk about the whole English versus American thing, but I'll just continue on from here. So now we're going to talk about brain and behavior. So I'm going to do this interactive thing with you all. We're going to actually take a survey or a factor or a section of a survey that is going to be relevant to some results we'll talk about in a second. And I think it's pretty fun to score your own dog on this. Essentially, the first question, this is from a thing called CBARC. It's a survey created by James Serpell, and it's a way to measure problem behavior and also a way to measure trainability and a few other positive behaviors. And so first one, when off leash, does your dog return immediately when called? 0 would be never, 4 would be always. And 2 would be they sometimes do it. And these questions are supposed to be, pretty neutral, so don't read into them too much. Just kind of think immediately off the top of your head, how would you rate your dog? Okay, this is the next one. Obeys the sit command immediately, or the sit cue. I'll let people think about that. My dog does this really well, but that's because I've kind of overtrained her on it. All right. Obeys the stay command or cue immediately. And again, it's just 0 out of 4. And now we have seems to attend or listen closely to everything you say or do. So do they pay a lot of attention to you? Okay. And then the next one, quick to respond to corrections or not thick-skinned. And think of correction in whatever way you want. This was written a while back, by the researchers. So maybe aversives were in mind, but let's also just think about any sort of pressure that would make a dog slightly uncomfortable. Okay, and quick to learn new tricks or tasks. Also 0 out of 4. Seven. Okay, this is important. So it's not easily distracted by sights, sounds, or smells. I know, and I know it kind of creates a double negative with the never and always, but if they're hard to distract, then you would let's see, this is reverse coded, so I'm just trying to remember how this is going. Not easy to distract, then put 4. And then if they are very little, distract 0. And then finally, 8 will fetch or attempt to fetch sticks, balls, or objects. Retrieve is also, you can think of it like that. Okay. Give another second for that one. Okay. So now, all you have to do is add up the scores for each question. So there were 8 questions. So you're going to add up the scores for each question and divide by 8. And that's going to produce your lab's CBARC trainability score. So I'll give people some time to do that. Oh, and just a reminder, if you have any questions, ask them in the chat and we'll try to answer them at the end. Okay, so now hopefully everyone has their score. It should be somewhere between 0 and 4. Now we are going to do something interactive, I hope, if it will load. Oh, it did. Okay, so if you have a lab, like if you have any other sort of dog, you can still take note of the score and everything, but just don't put in your score. But just to see something, only if you have a single breed lab, fill in this survey and just put respond anonymously. There's like an anonymous button, and then you don't have to create a account. And let's see if this can pick up people's scores. If not, we can put it in the chat. But oh, we've got one already. Okay, interesting. We're kind of having like a neck and neck race between 2 to 3 and 3 to 4. Your dogs are smart. Although intelligence isn't really trainability, and that's a whole other thing. Wow, 55% 3 to 4. I'm going to keep letting it go for a little bit longer. Oh, here's my dog. Lab mix. Okay, so now we have 60% 3 to 4, only 12 responses for 2 to 3, and then nothing for the other ones. Okay, I'm going to give you 30 more seconds if you want to put in your score, then we'll move on. And if your dog has a low score, that's okay. Oh, we just got another one for 3 to 4. Okay, so we'll go from here. So definitely towards the higher end we have for all of the dogs here today. And so just to kind of compare to published data, and I'm like thrilled that this worked out perfectly, but you'll see that Labrador retrievers score in the 2 to 3 or the 3 to 4 range, and usually not lower than that, at least on average. And in comparison, we have a breed like the Basset Hound, which is across the entire distribution. So we have some really untrainable ones, and we have some really trainable ones. And yeah, it's kind of like a normal distribution if you think about that in like mathy terms. So yeah, it definitely is this rightward skew of the training here, or leftward skew. And so this is from the same study. This is using the same survey that you just took, looking at trainability, the exact same questions. The average for the Labrador Retriever in this study, and I believe this is an American population, is 3.24. And the Basset Hound was unfortunately all the way down at 2.06, maybe fortunately or unfortunately, depending on what you like in a dog. But you can see there's this big difference here. And so not only are there breed differences in average trainability level, at least according to this metric, we see that the Labrador Retriever, out of a group of 11 dogs, dog breeds, is the most trainable. The Border Collie wasn't included in this study. I wish it was. That would have been cool. But yeah, I thought this went really well with what we just demonstrated there, that it's usually in that range. And so this is some newly published research that Dr. Hecht and I published in the Journal of Neuroscience. And so I was really interested in finding out what might have occurred in recent evolutionary history in dogs' brains, specifically what might have happened to their cortex and how this might relate to their trainability. So to back up a little bit, this is a picture of a dog brain. You might not know that. And this is a dog model. So this brain is kind of in the picture slanted a little bit like this. So here's the front. There's the back, and just this wrinkly outer layer that's like in the image as well, that's the cerebral cortex. And that's where people think that higher order functions happen in the brain. So what do I mean by higher order? So what I mean is like complex sensory processing, emotional processing, processing social things, thinking about decisions, remembering things, all sorts of higher level things that we often ascribe more to humans than to other animals. And the human cortex is famously very large. But basically what we found here is when we compared breeds that were recently created, like Labrador Retrievers, compared to breeds that were very ancient, or so-called primitive or ancient breed dogs, like, for instance, Shiba Inu, or an Azawak, or a Siberian Husky, or a Samoyed, something like that. And we looked to see what parts of their brain were bigger or smaller based off of what group they were in. And it turns out that Labradors that fell into this modern breed group had an expanded cerebral cortex in these regions that are blue here. So that's a lot of this cortex. And then the pre-modern dogs had more expansion in the amygdala. And the amygdala is a subcortical structure, so it's not cortical. And it is involved in more instinctive behavior, but especially lower level emotional processing, especially of fear. And so what we can see here in this plot is as this cortex expands, these numbers are not super meaningful to you, but they essentially are kind of like a percentage of increase for the cortex in that dog. And then trainability is just like we saw earlier. So some dogs actually, were at 4, which is crazy, like Joseph. And essentially there is this significant relationship, which means that these points really go together in this line here. And what it shows is that on the right-hand side, we have these blue dogs, these modern dogs, and they have more cerebral cortex and then also more trainability at the same time. Whereas the pre-modern or primitive ancient dogs don't. And interestingly, I thought in this study was that the dog with the most trainability was Joseph. And he wasn't a working dog, as you might anticipate. He was actually a companion dog. And then Otis over here had the most cortical expansion, and he was a service dog, or is a service dog. Both of these dogs are alive today. And so, oh, and yeah, I should also specify that how we studied their brains was with MRI neuroimaging, which is non-invasive. All right. So that's really cool. So maybe this cortex is related to trainability, and maybe this is more pronounced in labs, although we haven't done any or published any breed analyses yet. That will happen in the future, but it's seeming like that's the case. But we've also further looked at labs in particular and looked at how experience has shaped their cerebral cortex. So what I just showed you here, these differences are largely genetic differences because they're so massive. These are only differences that you would see with inherited differences in brain structure that happen through early neurodevelopment. Here we have dogs that are all Labrador retrievers, but they have lived very different lives. So we have dogs that have been trained for scent detection. We have dogs that have been trained for service work. And we also have dogs that have been trained for traditional hunting. And in teal or green here, you can see all of these different regions with expansion in these dogs. And we'll start with the scent detection dogs. So all of this kind of might just look like little blobs, but to kind of orient you, right here is the olfactory bulb. So this is what helps the dog discriminate scents. And it's a very early level processing level. So it's not doing complex things, but it is, you know, right off the bat discriminating scents. And you can see that it is on the rear of it is expanded in these scent detection dogs, which is probably what you would expect. Then also we have expansion in this section here, which is the dog version of the prefrontal cortex, if you've ever heard of that. So that's like the part of the brain that's right here, and is associated with high-level functions. If you've ever heard of Phineas Gage, he had a rod that went through his frontal cortex. But the frontal cortex is really thought to be the seat of higher cognition. It's supposed to be where all abstract thinking tends to happen, or is at least plays a role in generating it. And we see that it's expanded in scent detection dogs. And this is particularly interesting because in canids, so the family group that dogs belong to, the prurient gyrus is actually expanded in pack hunting species like wolves or dholes or African wild dogs. And so this is really interesting because in a way, scent detection is in some way mirroring a hunting sequence and is somewhat cooperative in that the dog in some cases will alert the handler. So I thought that was very cool. Then we also have parts of kind of the parietal cortex up here. And we don't really know much about what the parietal cortex is doing in dogs, but at least this gyrus right here, coming from the occipital lobe, is involved in vision. So visual processing is interesting, is involved here, which is interesting given that these are scent detection dogs, and you might expect that it might be more olfactory based, but in fact, it's not. It seems like vision is involved. And if you talk to scent detection handlers, I think a lot of them will often say that the dog is definitely using their vision as well as their nose to search, or at least to determine where they should search. Then moving on to the service dogs, we have expansion again in parts of the olfactory bulb, the part that is going to the piriform cortex, which is down here, which is where higher order or more complex olfactory or scent processing happens. And that's interesting. I don't have a really solid explanation for that, other than it might relate to social processing with a handler through olfactory means. Then we have the prurient gyrus again, which is involved. So it seems like all of these tasks, as you'll see over here, no matter what, are really taxing the prefrontal cortex of dogs. So they're where their most abstract thinking is happening. Then we also have this region here, which is the rostral composite gyrus. Not much is known about this. It is implicated in attachment in one study, and in another study, it is implicated in the processing of taste, and specifically avoiding noxious stimuli. So that's, bizarre. I'm not exactly sure what is going on there, except maybe the attachment element relates to how the dog relates to the handler. But again, this is just like very preliminary research, and so we're hoping that future work will explain some of these open questions more. And then with the hunting dogs, we see basically the same pattern, except we also have this auditory region here, which might relate to listening to whistles from a distance, potentially. And interestingly, it's not just working dogs whose brains are changed by their living and working experience. It's also companion dogs. So in this study, the companion dogs were service dogs that washed out of their program for mostly non-behavioral reasons. And they went on to live lives as family pets. And interestingly, they have a bigger hippocampus, which is pictured here, compared to the service dogs that I talked about earlier. And what that, that's really interesting because in animal literature, there is an understanding that the hippocampus typically expands with enrichment of some sort. So like environmental enrichment, like making a cage more complex for a rat to play in, or enrichment socially, like giving more social partners, things like that. And so potentially this could relate to these dogs being more environmentally enriched. So maybe people take their pet dogs to more places, although with the service dogs, you would expect them to go to a lot of places, but you have to remember these dogs at this point when they were scanned were at the very end of their training, so they hadn't entered the real world fully yet. So that might be an explanation why. But we're not really sure, and that's definitely an avenue for future research. But also, in addition to looking at expansion of different brain regions, we looked at the brain networks because the brain really is this giant network. And all these brain regions are connected to one another. So each dot here is a brain region. You can see how they're all connected in different ways. And the colors here correspond to different communities or regions, like major regions of the brain, which I'll talk about in a second. But you can see here that there are some broad similarities. The colors should be roughly corresponding between them, but there are some differences as well. And so this is between the companion and between the scent detection dogs, which were the most distinct dogs in our data set. And you can see that the cerebellum, which is the back of the brain, which is involved in the sense of balance, as well as it's involved in learning. It is kind of clustered away from everything else. It's not highly connected here. But then in the scent detection dogs, it's in the middle of the entire brain's network, which is really interesting. And I think that might be because the scent detection dogs in this study are from the Penn Vet Working Dog Center. And those dogs are trained to search on rubble from an early age, or not an early age, but a relatively early age, so that they have the potential to become search and rescue dogs. And so that kind of, and they also have physical fitness programs and things like that that challenge the dogs to balance and things things that are very physical in nature. So that might be why the cerebellum is so central to brain processing in these dogs. And so here is a picture of one of those dogs. Actually, one of the dogs, maybe one of the dogs in our study, I can't remember if this is. And they're finding a person hidden in this rubble here, and they get a toy reward. But you can see how this would really challenge you to climb over, even if you're a dog. And then also there's some, core similarities, like I mentioned. So there's these two big dots, which are called hubs, which means they have a ton of connections in the brain. And these are the left and the right side of the brain for the caudate nucleus, which is a brain region that is very well known to be involved in the sense of reward. So even though maybe they're trained differently, reward seems to be something that is important to both the companion and the scent dog brain. All right, so now we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about genetics and health. So you all know this, labs love food, but you might not know that scientifically speaking, labs really love food. They love it more than most other breeds. And this has been confirmed by multiple studies in multiple populations. And here is this standardized replicated questionnaire, which is called DORA. I forget what it stands for, but you can look it up. It's by Raffan et al. And it's got a lot of questions, but here are a sampling of them. And it's somewhat like CBARC, where you kind of rate from never to always, except there are a lot more questions for this than there were for the trainability one. And if you want to take the survey yourself, this is the link. So you can actually see potentially your dog, how food motivated your dog is, although I'm not sure if they will give you a score at the end. I haven't taken it myself because you can only do it if you have a lab, and I have a lab mix. But yeah, save this link for later. It's like godogs.org.uk. Okay. And not only do labs love food a lot, they also happen to be the most likely to be overweight. And that is overweight by body condition score standards, which are pretty universal and used, in veterinary practices. So you've probably seen one of these before. You don't want to be at this end or that end. You want to be somewhere in the middle. And unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, labs really have this tendency to gain weight. And why is this? Well, there's this really big landmark study that you actually might have heard about, which maybe came out, I guess, in 2015, 2016, about the POMC gene. So the POMC gene, I'm not going to say its full name because it's horrible. You can look it up yourself. It's so long. There's so many letters. But basically, there's this really scary diagram here, but I'll walk you through it. It's not as scary as it looks. So we have, so essentially up here we have the dog brain. And in the dog brain, there's a brain region called the hypothalamus. Now, the hypothalamus receives signals about energy status from the body, about like after eating, or basically like, or how much fat and energy is stored in the body. And kind of uses this information to then control hunger. And so you can kind of modulate it. The POMC gene is a gene that creates this protein that creates these little molecules that then signal to the brain certain things. And the MSH one basically will dampen food intake. It's kind of like a dimmer switch when it gets activated by the POMC gene, which, by the way, is activated by leptin, which is released from fat cells. And so this whole pathway works, and then, okay, we have fat, we don't need more energy, So we are going to reduce intake. So that's how that works. And then there's also this MC4R molecule that is increasing energy expenditure, but it's not really important. We don't really need to talk about that. But what happens in some Labradors is that there is a deletion or a mutation that causes a deletion of the POMC or the end of the POMC gene. So it can't create the POMC protein that creates the molecules that deals with the food modulation and the energy expenditure. And because of that, we have this increase in food intake because nothing is telling it to dim it. And we have a decrease in energy expenditure, which means we're saving more fat. And essentially, with this one study that came out originally, they found that if you look at a sample of dogs and look at the percentage of how many of these mutations they have, you can actually predict how much more they are going to weigh on average. And so the wild type means there's two copies of a gene, and the wild type is there's no mutation, it works properly. That's 77% of labs. So that seems like a lot, but 20% are heterozygous, which means, if you taken biology before, it's kind of like one of those Punnett squares. The heterozygous dogs have one normal copy of the gene, one mutated version of the gene. And that causes them to be on average 4 pounds heavier, which is a lot considering that dogs don't weigh as much as we do. So that's a significantly more percentage of their body. If I wanted to do math, I could do that, but I don't want to come up with what that number is right now, but I think it's like 7% or something. And then for the homozygous dogs, it's 2%. And these dogs have 2 mutations. Yeah, there I had a typo. And for them, they weigh about 8 pounds heavier on average. And so what this means is really these homozygous dogs that have these 2 mutations are this is companion labs. There's a typo here. And this is assistance labs. So most labs don't have it. Some do. A few have it really badly. Then this should say service labs. For service labs, you actually have way more heterozygotes and way fewer wild type and more homozygous dogs. So there's a larger percentage of the population that is prone to putting on these extra pounds. And this might have to do with the fact that these dogs are selected for aspects of trainability like food motivation, because these dogs are trained exclusively with food. So that might be why they've actually maybe unconsciously or consciously selected for this in this population. But unfortunately, what it means is that these dogs never feel full. They probably always feel a level of hunger, which is a little concerning, I think, from a welfare standpoint, and something we definitely need to think about. But this isn't the whole story with the POMC gene. Body weight, just like many other traits, is complex, meaning that many different genes control it, not just one. And this is from a GWAS study, a genome-wide association study. And this is just showing in like a graphical format the chromosome, and basically these towers represent how significant this part of the chromosome or this gene is to be related to being overweight in labs. And you can see that there are these red lines are the significance thresholds, and there are some genes that this thing found that are related to and predictive of overweightness in these dogs. And some of them, just to kind of like briefly mention kind of what they do, This one, it's expressed in the hypothalamus, which again is involved in controlling appetite. It also is involved in the immune system, and low-grade inflammation actually causes problems with fat storage. And so that might be how this gene is interacting, although this is just an association study. So they found a relationship, but they don't know the mechanism yet. Then we also have CDH8, which is neurodevelopment. CARD1 also is involved in inflammation. So again, that thing. And then this one is involved in neurodevelopment as well as cardiovascular development. And I believe this one is also involved in neurodevelopment. So maybe brain regions that are controlling some of these energy storing mechanisms. And unfortunately, they found that there is a difference across colors for how at risk a dog is for being pretty overweight. So this is a polygenic score, which means basically if you have a lot of genes where you have mutations that put you at risk, you have a bunch of them, they kind of work additively to create risk of getting the affliction, which in this case is being overweight. And so higher scores means higher chance of being overweight. And here they differentiated the red from the rest, but you can see that there is a significant difference. These stars mean significant, but the chocolate labs, this is the average, the black line there. The average is higher in chocolate labs than it is in yellow labs, and than it is in black, although they're kind of comparable. And then it's a little lower in red. So that's also something to keep in mind if you have a chocolate lab, is they might be especially more hungry or hungrier than usual. Okay, so just to kind of wrap it up here, if you enjoy science and hearing about this sort of stuff and you want to learn more about your own dog, think about participating in the Canine Brains Project, especially if you live nearby. We do a lot of different things. We do behavioral experiments in this room, pictured here. And here is the website and the QR code. We also do MRI brain imaging, which is our main thing, actually. So this is the MRI scanner that we use. It's the same scanner that's used with humans. And this is an example of a dog brain scan. So that's what it would look like. And then we also do surveys. If you live far away, or even if you live close, you can fill out these surveys that we have online. We have, it's kind of interesting to think about your dog as you do these things, like how many words does your dog respond to? That's one of the things we're studying. And then really, I just want to briefly point out that we have this study that's particularly relevant to labs, which is the working dog breed study. And in this study, we want to know what parts of the brain are involved in working dog behavior, and how is specifically the lab brain different from that of other breeds. This study is a non-invasive MRI brain imaging study. It's open both to working as well as non-working labs from whatever lineage. So don't worry about lineage. They can be working, they can be non-working. Okay, I'll leave that up for a second more. Take a drink. All right, well, thank you for listening. If you want to keep up with my work, here's some of my stuff that I will update from time to time. The Instagram is really new, so don't judge it. It has like no followers. And then my website is always the best place to check for publications. And then I'm active on Blue Sky. I used to be on Twitter a lot, not so much anymore. You can probably guess why. So yeah. All right, so now it's probably time for questions. And I am going to try to do this question and answer feature in Zoom. Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to answer the first one. Okay. So is the Chesapeake from St. John's or not? Yes, they are. And they're actually from St. John's dogs that were, for whatever reason, shipwrecked and ended up in the US and rather than going overseas. Definitely from St. John's water dogs that Labs descended from, but they for some reason just ended up in the Chesapeake Bay because of that shipwreck. Um, okay. Oh yeah, chat is turned off. Yes, I meant Q&A. So sorry. Yeah, someone said the chat is turned off, meant Q&A. Yes, that's what I meant. Okay, let's see. Um, Someone asked, will the video be available after this presentation? Yes, we're going to share it somehow, probably on the website, but I will follow up with you. Okay, so someone wants me to talk about the English and American labs. So this is kind of controversial, as some people know, or as most of you probably know. But essentially, let's go back to that slide where we had the lab types. Um, yeah, okay. So the American lab type is a body type that looks like this, a lot like this. And what this is like a lankier, leaner, longer build. And then the English lab has a tighter, stockier. I'm probably using words that are gonna, not be accurate from a confirmation standpoint, but basically they are a little bit blockier. And some people kind of will mistakenly think that working line types are all American labs. At least in America, people think that. And then all the English labs are the common type or the pet or conformation type. But you can have individuals born in the working type or the common type with different body types. So you might throw a lankier dog in a population of like more common types. So it's not a useful term in terms of like differentiating populations, but it is a useful term in differentiating body types. And then in terms of like how that relates to behavior, no one's ever looked at how that per se relates to behavior. But just because the working type tend to be more American style in America, um, those ones tend to have the working type traits and so forth. Okay, someone asked, how big is your magnet? Tesla. It is a 3 Tesla. It's a research grade MRI scanner. So more than your veterinary scanner, which is probably like 1-ish Tesla. Oh, okay, someone has an interesting thing. Someone says, are you familiar with the canine cognition study that Karen Overall conducted about 10 or 11 years ago? She found interesting results that it mattered what experiences the dog might have had in utero and significantly for multiple generations. She found that companion dogs responded faster and more efficiently than pure purpose-bred dogs. Um, I thought that fascinating. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I haven't read that particular study. But it's definitely the case that we know from other species. There's been a lot of work in rodents as well as in humans, knowing that things that happen in utero definitely affect the developing offspring, and will actually influence their genetics. Usually we think of genes as being very stable, but some genes kind of have these on-off switch that are called methylation. And you can turn on, experience can turn on and off those switches. Definitely you can have experiential effects influencing outcomes down the line, although we really don't understand much about it, and it's probably not doing as much as the base genetics are. Oh yeah, this is a great question. Someone said, do you know if they found behavioral effects in the POMC dogs, like higher frustration or arousal? Yes, they had them do an impossible task. So the impossible task is like a task that is done in canine cognition science a lot, where you basically have an object where at first food is easy to access from it, then it becomes a little harder, then it becomes impossible, you know, if you don't have thumbs, and you look to see how hard the dog works to get at it. So the researchers were kind of using this as a gauge of like a behavioral gauge of food motivation, like how hard are they willing to work? And these dogs worked hard for it when they had the POMC gene. So like they touched the apparatus more, they were showing more vigorous behavior. I can't remember if it was necessarily frustration, but it was definitely higher arousal. Let's see. I'm just reading more questions. And if I don't get to your question, I'm sorry. I'm only gonna answer the um, ones that I have the background knowledge for. Um, okay. Someone said, could the differences in brain structure for service dogs in regards to enrichment be due to early socialization and outside environments becoming the normal day-to-day instead of something exciting? Ooh, that's really interesting. So in this particular study, the companion dogs came from the service organization, so they had the same early environment. So I don't think it's differences in early socialization because it was identical. Um, but at some point that changed. But most of these dogs were released when they were adults. So basically they had all the early development the same. Okay, someone says it's impressive that you're focusing on a specific dog breed in canine science. Thanks. I'm curious, do you plan to expand your work to other breeds or perhaps to specific groups like companion dogs? Yeah, so I actually do study a couple other breeds as well. I wish I could say I just study labs, but I also study in my dissertation project, I study German Shepherds and Border Collies. Yes, we do want to expand to companion dogs. So in that working dog breed study, we're open to companion dogs that come from the so-called common type lineage or the working type lineage. Doesn't matter. We're interested in them. Oh, this is an excellent question. Very practical. Are these genetic mutations on the POMC genes readily detectable for the purposes of monitoring? Yes. So Embark and Wisdom Panel both screen for it. So if you do the health version of the Embark test, I know Embark better, but if you do that, you'll see. I did it for my dog, and she has the wild type, so she does not have the POMC gene problem. Let's see if there are any other Fun ones. Someone said, are labs the only breed eligible for canine brain study? No, we're also taking border collies, and we're taking German shepherds. And my colleague Olivia Riley is also running a study. So if you and it's an MRI brain study. So if you have a child and you have a dog, the child I think has to be between 8 to 10, but I don't know, check that on our website. But if you have a child and a dog, they could both participate. And that would be really cool. But then it's not breed specific. So it can even also be a mixed breed dog, like my dog. But for my study, it's just labs, border collies, German shepherds. Let's see. Okay. Um, do you know any other work on the differences between coat colors? Yeah, I can, let's see, strain my memory for a second. So for mainly the big behavioral differences that, I mean, consistently across studies in different populations, chocolate labs are behaviorally distinct from yellow and black labs. Um, Depending on the study, they find slightly different things. One thing that has been published on is that there is I think it's, I believe it is they are more hyperactive than the other, or sorry, they're less hyperactive than the others. And then let's see what else is there. Also, the food motivation is higher in them in general. So, and that might be related to some of the POMC gene stuff. But there's definitely more work out there. I know there's actually like a dissertation from someone out of Australia. I really wish I could remember their name, but yeah, there's work out there if you look for it. I'll answer a couple more questions. I'll go to like 9, 10, so I don't take up too much time. Um, Someone asked, do you know if the risk of weight has to do with humans finding certain colors more cute and thus feeding them more in conjunction with a gene? Or are there any studies on this that you know of? Okay, this is really cool. Yeah, so uh, that is one hypothesis or alternative hypothesis, so an alternative explanation that I believe the authors in the original paper talked about. What is probably not the case because the owners of the or the parents of the chocolate labs, they didn't uh rate themselves as giving their dog more food than the other groups. So it seems like because that survey is split into two different factors, like there's one that's more on the dog end, and there's another end that's secretly testing the human to see how much do you give your food, how permissive are you, that sort of thing. And so I don't think because of that it's related to how cute they are, but it totally could be. It also could be related to the fact that chocolate labs generally aren't as common in the working types because they're not really selecting for color as much. They're, I don't know, and there might be a difference with them and the POMC gene, but yeah, yeah, I don't think it's because they're cuter, but that's a really good question. Um, Someone asked differences between personalities of males versus females. Um, let's see. There, I don't remember from my reading of there being any stark differences between male and female Labradors in particular. But between male and female dogs in general, some studies find some minor differences, like for instance, slightly more aggression in male dogs, but of course it's always context specific. Um, And with dogs, it actually matters not only if they're male or female, but also whether or not they're castrated. So are they neutered or spayed? So we're doing some of that research right now. Turns out it impacts their brains. I won't tell the results yet, but it's pretty exciting. And also turns out, yeah, it turns out that yeah, 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 they have different brains. They might have different behaviors. So I think neutering and spaying makes a lot of a difference for dogs, but maybe not so much the distinction between male and female. Someone said, I think the Aussie you're thinking of is Mia Cobb. Yeah, it might be Mia Cobb. It might, I don't know, maybe it's her dissertation or maybe, yeah, I don't know. Okay, just a couple more questions. What are my thoughts on how to prioritize breeding out the POMC mutation in terms of breed health and ethics without discarding other crucial traits? That's a really good point. The without discarding other crucial traits. Genes are, genes aren't independent entities. They relate to one another. And you could potentially, when trying to select out variants of one gene, impact other genes or other parts of the gene network. So you have to be somewhat careful there. But I think that I think maybe this is something to really consider more in the assistance dog community, because they really have the POMC gene at like that really high frequency. And I think that um, since we are deliberately selecting these dogs, it's not like they just come out of nature however they are. Like we're choosing to make them a certain way. It's probably on our shoulders to make it such that like these dogs don't have welfare issues. But again, you have to be careful. You have to balance it with different traits. If it turned out that POMC gene was related to friendliness in some fundamental way, and if we change that, it would alter that, then maybe we wouldn't want to do it. But I think once we understand more about it, we might start to think about breeding away from that, especially in assistance dog communities. And then using alternative methods for, encouraging food motivation in those dogs. Um, Oh, just one thing. Someone said, "Oh, I asked the question about breeding. I have an assistance dog who has one copy." Yeah, yeah, it's pretty common. Yeah. And also, one thing I just want to say about the, big caveat about the weight study. Um, if your dog is naturally the wild type, those types usually stay within a pretty slim range no matter how you feed them. But if you use a permissive feeding approach, meaning you feed table scraps, you don't measure how much food you're feeding, you don't measure how many calories, or you don't estimate, then your dog is very, very likely to gain weight. But if you have one of those dogs that is at high risk, but you really control their calories, then they'll probably be fine. And then one last thing. When do you anticipate publishing the study on brain behavior of neutered versus intact dogs? Hopefully, in the next year or so, sometime within then. So, keep abreast with what we're doing. So our Instagram is canine_brains, caninebrains.org. Okay, cool. Well, I'm going to stop sharing there. Thank you everyone for coming. This was like really fun for me. I hope it was fun for you. Um, and we'll probably put a recording of this up on the website. And so yeah, basically just yeah, follow us on social media and you'll see this again if you want to. All right. Well, thank you. Bye.